The morning sun painted the Seattle skyline in shades of gold as David adjusted his climbing harness. One final time. At 34, he had built a successful architectural firm from nothing, designing buildings that reached toward the sky like his own ambitions. But today, he wasn't thinking about blueprints or client meetings. Today was about the one thing that made him feel truly alive. The challenge of conquering vertical rock faces with nothing but his strength and determination. David preferred climbing alone. It wasn't that he didn't have friends, but solitude. Felt safer somehow. When you're responsible only for yourself, there's no one to disappoint, no one to let down. His business partner often joked that David treated relationships like construction projects, carefully planned, with clear boundaries and exit strategies. The rock face before him looked challenging but manageable. He climbed this route twice before, each time pushing himself a little harder, a little higher. His calloused hands found their familiar grip on the cold stone, and he began his ascent with the methodical precision that had made him successful in everything he touched. 20 feet up. The rhythm felt perfect. His body moved like a well-oiled machine, each muscle working in harmony with the next. David lived for these moments when his mind went quiet and his body took over completely. No client demands, no employee problems, no complicated emotions, just the simple equation of strength meeting stone. But nature has its own plans, and sometimes the most experienced climbers forget that respect for the mountain must never waver. A handhold that had supported him dozens of times before chose that moment to crumble. The sound of breaking rock echoed through the morning air as David's world suddenly shifted. From controlled ascent to chaotic fall, the safety rope caught him, but not before his shoulder met an unforgiving ledge with a sickening crack. Pain shot through his body like lightning, and for the first time in years, David felt completely helpless. The man who built his life on control and precision now hung suspended, dependent on equipment and luck for his very survival. Getting down proved almost as challenging as the fall itself. Each movement sent waves of agony through his shoulder, and by the time he reached his truck, David knew this wasn't something he could ignore or push through. The emergency room confirmed what his body already knew. Torn rotator cuff, damaged ligaments, and a recovery timeline that would keep him away from both climbing and his drafting table for months. "You'll need physical therapy," the doctor said, his tone matter-of-fact as he signed referral papers. Extensive therapy. This isn't the kind of injury that heals on its own. David stared at the paperwork, feeling like his carefully constructed world was crumbling faster than that treacherous handhold. His architectural firm was in the middle of their biggest project yet, a mixed-use development that would establish his reputation citywide. How could he oversee construction details when he couldn't even lift his arm above his head? The insurance company assigned him to elite physical therapy, a clinic downtown with stellar reviews and a reputation for handling complex cases. David spent the drive there trying to mentally prepare himself for what he imagined would be a sterile, clinical environment filled with machines and impersonal treatment protocols. Instead, he found himself in a space that felt more like a wellness center than a medical facility. Natural light flooded through large windows. Plants added life to every corner, and the sound of water from a small fountain created an atmosphere of calm that immediately put him on edge. David wasn't comfortable with calm. He preferred the controlled chaos of construction sites and the predictable stress of deadline. "Pressure, you must be David," a warm voice said behind him. He turned to see a woman in her early 30s approaching, with confident steps. Dr. Lisa Rodriguez had the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her eyes held the focused intensity of someone who took their work seriously. "I'm Dr. Rodriguez, but everyone calls me Lisa. I'll be working with you over the next few months," she extended her hand, and David noticed the strength in her grip, the calluses that suggested she understood physical demands beyond just textbook knowledge. "Let's start with some basic assessments," Lisa said, leading him to a quiet treatment room. "I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with here." What followed was the most thorough physical examination David had ever experienced. Lisa's hands moved with professional precision as she tested range of motion, checked muscle response, and assessed the extent of his injury. But there was something else in her approach, a level of attention that made David uncomfortably aware of how long it had been since anyone had studied him so carefully. "You're favoring your left side more than necessary," Lisa observed, making notes on her tablet. "When did you start doing that?" David frowned. "I don't know what you mean. Your posture, the way you hold your shoulders, even how you walked into the building. You're protecting more than just the injured area. This suggests you've been dealing with pain longer than just since the accident." Something about her certainty irritated him. "I think I know my own body." Lisa looked up from her tablet, her expression patient but unwavering. "I'm sure you do. But bodies tell stories, and yours is saying you've been pushing through discomfort for a while now, probably years." The accuracy of her observation hit closer to home than David wanted to admit. Yes, he'd been dealing with minor aches and pains from long hours, hunched over drafting tables. Yes, he'd been ignoring the warning signs his body had been sending, but he wasn't about to admit that to someone he'd just met. "I think we should focus on the climbing injury," he said firmly. Lisa nodded, but David caught a knowing look in her eyes that suggested she wasn't fooled by his deflection. "Of course, but healing happens in context. To fix what's broken, I need to understand the whole picture." She spent the next hour putting David through a series of movements and tests, each one revealing new information about his condition. Her running commentary was both professional and strangely personal. "Interesting. You have incredible core strength, but you're barely using your stabilizer muscles. It's like you've trained your body to depend on pure force rather than balance. Your flexibility is actually quite good, but you hold tension in your neck and upper back even when you're trying to relax. Do you have trouble sleeping? This shoulder injury is significant, but your body's compensation patterns suggest you're used to working through pain. That's going to make recovery more challenging." Each observation felt like Lisa was reading a book he'd never realized he'd written. The way she studied his movements, cataloged his responses, and made connections between seemingly unrelated details was both impressive and unsettling. "Here's what I'm thinking," Lisa said as she completed her assessment. "Your climbing accident was serious, but it's not the whole story. You've been setting yourself up for this kind of injury for years through overuse and poor recovery habits. If we only fix the immediate damage, you'll be back here in 6 months with something else." David felt his defensive walls going up. "I just need to get back to normal function. Nothing complicated." "Normal function is what got you hurt in the first place," Lisa replied calmly. "I'm suggesting we aim higher than normal. I'm suggesting we aim for optimal." There was something in her tone that made David look at her more carefully. This wasn't just clinical assessment. This was someone who genuinely cared about outcomes, who took each case personally. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked. Lisa smiled, and for the first time since the accident, David felt like someone understood the magnitude of what he was facing. "I'm proposing we treat this like the complex puzzle it is. Your body, your habits, your goals, everything connected, everything important. It's going to take time. It's going to be uncomfortable. And you're going to have to trust me even when you don't understand what I'm doing." David left the clinic that day with a treatment schedule that would bring him back 3 times a week for the next several months. As he sat in his car, he realized that Dr. Lisa Rodriguez had managed to see things about him in 1 hour that he'd been ignoring for years. Something told him that this recovery was going to change more than just his shoulder. Whether he was ready for that kind of change remained to be seen. 3 weeks into his recovery, David had developed a routine that felt almost normal. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 10 in the morning, he found himself walking through the doors of elite physical therapy. What he hadn't expected was how much he'd started looking forward to these sessions, despite his initial reluctance. Lisa had a way of making each appointment feel less like medical treatment and more like solving an interesting puzzle. She approached his recovery with the same methodical precision he used in his architectural work, but with a warmth that made the entire process feel collaborative rather than clinical. "Today we're going to try something different," Lisa announced as David settled onto the treatment table. She'd been saying variations of this phrase for weeks now, and David had learned it usually meant she'd discovered something new about his condition. That required attention. Different how? David asked, though he'd grown to trust her judgment, even when he didn't understand her methods. I've been watching how you move, how you compensate for the injury, and I think we've been approaching this backwards. Lisa pulled up a chair beside him, her tablet ready to capture notes. Instead of focusing on what's wrong with your shoulder, I want to understand what's right with the rest of your body. This was vintage Lisa, turning conventional wisdom on its head and finding angles that other therapists might miss. Over the past 3 weeks, David had come to appreciate her unconventional thinking, even when it challenged his own assumptions about recovery. Lie back and just relax, Lisa instructed, her hands beginning their familiar assessment routine. But today felt different. Her touch was more exploratory, less focused on the obvious injury site. She worked methodically down his arm, testing muscle response and joint mobility with the concentration of a scientist conducting important research. Your forearm strength is remarkable, she murmured, more to herself than to him, and your grip strength is still excellent despite the shoulder injury. That tells me your body has been finding ways to adapt that we can build on. David found himself watching her face as she worked. There was something almost artistic in the way Lisa approached her craft, her brow furrowed slightly when she encountered unexpected tension. Her eyes lit up when she discovered something that pleased her, and she had an unconscious habit of biting her lower lip when she was thinking through a complex problem. "Can I ask you something?" David said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Of course. Lisa's hands continued their systematic exploration of his arm and shoulder. "Why did you become a physical therapist? You could have been a doctor, a researcher, maybe even an engineer. You think like one." Lisa smiled without looking up from her work. Honest answer. I used to be a professional dancer. Ballet, specifically. I spent 15 years training my body to do impossible things, pushing every muscle and joint to its absolute limit. This revelation surprised David. Looking at Lisa now, he could see traces of that background in her posture, the way she moved with unconscious grace around the treatment room. "What happened?" he asked gently. "Knee injury during a performance. Not dramatic, not career-ending in the traditional sense, but it made me realize I've been treating my body like a machine instead of understanding it as a complex system." Lisa's hands found a particularly tight spot in his shoulder blade, and she began working on it with patient pressure. "Physical therapy saved my dancing career for another 3 years. More importantly, it taught me that healing isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about optimizing what's possible." David felt something shift in his understanding of their relationship. This wasn't just professional expertise. Lisa brought personal experience to her work that made her uniquely qualified to understand his frustration with physical limitations. "That's why you study people the way you do," he said, the pieces clicking together. "You're not just treating symptoms." "Exactly." Lisa's eyes met his, and David felt that familiar flutter of awareness that had been growing stronger with each session. "I study bodies the way you study building sites. Every detail matters. Every system connects to every other system, and the foundation determines everything else." The comparison to his architectural work was so accurate it almost made David laugh. He never thought of physical therapy as construction. But Lisa's systematic approach to rebuilding his shoulder function felt remarkably similar to the process of designing a complex structure. "Speaking of studying," Lisa said, moving to work on his range of motion, "I've been keeping detailed notes on your progress, and I've noticed some interesting patterns." She pulled out her tablet and showed him a series of charts and graphs tracking his improvement. The level of detail was impressive, not just range of motion measurements, but notes on his mood, energy levels, sleep quality, and even how he held himself during their conversations. "You've been watching me that closely?" David asked, feeling simultaneously flattered and exposed. "It's my job to watch," Lisa replied matter-of-factly. "But with you, I find myself paying attention to things I don't usually track." Like how you unconsciously straighten your shoulders when you talk about your work, or how you relax completely when you're describing a climbing route. David felt heat rise in his cheeks. The idea that Lisa had been studying him so thoroughly was both thrilling and terrifying. No one had ever paid such careful attention to his habits, his responses, his subtle reactions. "Is that normal?" he asked. "I mean, do you usually analyze your patients this thoroughly?" Lisa paused in her work, considering the question carefully. "Honestly, no. Usually I focus on the injury, develop a treatment plan, and guide people through their recovery. But with you," she trailed off, seeming to search for the right words. "With me what? With you, I find myself wanting to understand the whole picture. Your injury is healing well, but there's something about how you carry yourself, how you interact with the world, that makes me think we could accomplish something more significant than just getting you back to your previous level of function." David's pulse quickened. There was something in Lisa's tone that suggested this went beyond professional interest, though he couldn't be sure if he was reading too much into her words. "What do you mean by something more significant?" he asked. Lisa resumed her work on his shoulder, but her touch seemed more deliberate now, as if she was paying attention to his responses in a new way. "I mean that most people come to physical therapy wanting to get back to normal. But normal wasn't working for you, David. Normal was headed for injury, for burnout, for a dozen other problems you weren't even aware of yet." She was right, and David knew it. The climbing accident had been a wake-up call he'd been too stubborn to hear. His body had been sending warning signals for months, maybe years, and he'd ignored them all in favor of pushing harder, climbing higher, working longer. "So what are you suggesting?" he asked. "I'm suggesting we use this recovery period to rebuild you better than you were before. Stronger, more balanced, more aware of what your body needs." Lisa's hands found the exact spot where his shoulder had been aching, and she began working on it with the focused intensity that had become familiar. "But that means you have to trust me, even when my methods seem unusual." David looked at her face, noting the determination in her expression, the way she approached his recovery like a personal mission. Something about her dedication made him want to rise to meet her expectations. "Okay," he said simply, "I trust you." Lisa's smile was radiant. "Good, because next week, we're taking your therapy outside of this building. I want to see how you move in your natural environment, understand how you interact with challenges when you're not in a controlled clinical setting." As David left the clinic that day, he realized that somewhere in the past 3 weeks, his relationship with Lisa had shifted from patient and therapist to something more collaborative, more personal. She wasn't just treating his injury. She was studying him like he was a fascinating project. And surprisingly, he found himself looking forward to being the subject of her careful attention. The thought both excited and terrified him in equal measure. The morning air felt crisp against David's face as he stood outside the climbing gym, waiting for Lisa to arrive. When she'd suggested taking his therapy session to an actual climbing facility, he'd been skeptical. But after 6 weeks of traditional clinic sessions, he was curious to see what she had in mind. Lisa appeared around the corner wearing athletic clothes that showed off her dancer's posture and confident stride. She carried a small backpack and had her hair pulled back in a practical braid. David found himself noticing details about her that had nothing to do with physical therapy. The way she moved with natural grace, how her eyes lit up when she spotted him waiting, ready to try something completely different. Lisa asked, her smile infectious. "As ready as I'll ever be," David replied, though he felt nervous about returning to any kind of climbing environment so soon after his accident. Inside the gym, Lisa surprised him by heading not to the climbing walls but to a quiet corner with yoga mats and balance equipment. "Before we even think about height, I want to understand how you move when you're not thinking about it," she explained. What followed was unlike any physical therapy session David had experienced. Lisa guided him through a series of movements that seemed more like dance than exercise. She demonstrated each motion first, her body flowing from one position to another with fluid precision. That reminded him of her ballet background. "Your turn," Lisa said, positioning herself beside him on the mat. Don't think about it. Just follow my lead. David felt self-conscious at first, his movements stiff and awkward compared to Lisa's natural grace. But as they worked through the routine, he found himself relaxing, letting his body respond instinctively to her guidance. Much better, Lisa murmured, adjusting his posture with gentle touches. You're starting to trust your body again instead of fighting it. Her hands on his shoulders sent unexpected warmth through him, and David realized that somewhere along the way, his awareness of Lisa had shifted from purely professional to something much more personal. The way she studied his movements, the careful attention she paid to his responses, felt intimate in a way that had nothing to do with medical treatment. Can I ask you something? David said as they moved through a particularly challenging balance sequence. Always, Lisa replied, her focus never wavering from his form. When you watch me move, what do you see? I mean, really see? Lisa paused, considering her answer carefully. I see someone who's been carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders for so long that he's forgotten how to stand up straight. I see incredible strength being used inefficiently because you've never learned to trust support from others. The accuracy of her observation hit David like a physical blow. She was right. He'd been carrying responsibility, stress, and expectations alone for years, building his life around the belief that depending on others was a weakness. I also see, Lisa continued, moving closer to adjust his stance, someone who's capable of so much more than he realizes. Your body wants to move with grace and power, but you've been holding it back with tension and fear. David felt something shift inside him, a loosening of defenses he'd held for years. How do you see all of that from watching me do these exercises? Bodies don't lie, Lisa said simply. They tell stories about how we live, what we fear, what we dream about. Yours tells the story of someone who's been protecting himself for so long that he's forgotten what it feels like to be truly open. They moved to the climbing wall next, but Lisa's approach was completely different from what David expected. Instead of focusing on roots or technique, she had him simply place his hands on the wall and feel the texture of the holds. Close your eyes, she instructed, standing close enough that he could feel her presence beside him. Tell me what you noticed. David pressed his palms against the artificial rock surface, letting his other senses take over. It's cooler than I expected, rougher in some places, smoother in others. What else? I can feel the weight of the wall, how solid it is, but also potential energy, I guess. Like it's waiting for something. Lisa's voice was soft with approval. That's exactly right. Now, instead of seeing the wall as something to conquer, what if you saw it as something to dance with? David opened his eyes and looked at her, confused. Dance with a wall. Watch, Lisa said, and to his amazement, she began to move up the wall with fluid motions that looked nothing like traditional climbing. Her movements were deliberate but flowing, each hold seeming to lead naturally to the next. She made it look effortless, like a conversation between her body and the wall. When she came down, David was staring at her with newfound respect. How did you do that? That wasn't climbing. That was something else entirely. That's what I want to teach you, Lisa said, her eyes bright with excitement. Not just how to climb again, but how to move with your whole body working together. How to trust the process instead of forcing the outcome. They spent the next hour working on basic movements, with Lisa guiding David through exercises that challenged his balance, flexibility, and coordination. But more than that, she was teaching him to pay attention to his body's signals in a way he'd never done before. Your breathing changes when you get frustrated, Lisa observed as David struggled with a particularly challenging sequence. Your shoulders tense up, your grip gets too tight. What if, instead of fighting those reactions, you use them as information? David paused, considering her words. Information about what? About what your body needs. Maybe when you feel that tension, it's not a sign that you're failing. Maybe it's a sign that you need to slow down. Breathe deeper, approach the problem differently. As they worked together, David became increasingly aware of how carefully Lisa was studying him. She noticed when he favored his left side, when he held his breath during difficult movements, when he unconsciously braced for pain that didn't come. Her attention was so complete, so focused, that it felt like being seen for the first time in years. "You're watching me very carefully," David said during a rest break. Surprising himself with his directness, Lisa looked up from her notes, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "It's my job to watch. Is it your job to remember that I take exactly 3 deep breaths before attempting anything challenging? Or that I unconsciously flex my left hand when I'm thinking through a problem?" Lisa's flush deepened. "You noticed that I noticed those things. I noticed that you notice everything," David said softly. "The question is why?" For a moment, Lisa seemed to struggle with her answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than usual. "Because I've never had a patient who responds to treatment the way you do. Most people want to get better and get back to their normal lives. But you seem genuinely interested in understanding why things work the way they do. And that's unusual. It's unusual for me to be this invested in someone's complete recovery," Lisa admitted. "Usually I focus on the injury, fix the problem, send people on their way. But with you, I find myself wanting to understand everything. How you think, how you move, how you approach challenges." David felt his heart rate increase, and professionally. "Is that a problem?" Lisa met his eyes directly. "I don't know yet. What I do know is that I've never approached physical therapy the way I approach working with you. I've never studied someone so thoroughly or cared so much about the outcome." As they finished the session and prepared to leave, David realized that something fundamental had shifted between them. Lisa's careful study of his body and movements had become something more personal, more invested. And for the first time in years, he found himself wanting to be worthy of that kind of attention. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. But as he watched Lisa pack her equipment with the same methodical care she brought to everything else, David knew he was looking forward to finding out where this careful study of his would lead them both. 2 months into his recovery, David found himself sitting in Lisa's office after what should have been a routine session. But nothing about his relationship with Lisa felt routine anymore. She had asked him to stay behind, saying she wanted to discuss his progress, and something in her tone suggested this conversation would be different from their usual post-session check-ins. "Your shoulder is healing beautifully," Lisa began, pulling up his progress charts on her computer. "Range of motion is at 90%, strength is improving daily, and the pain levels are minimal." David nodded, though he sensed there was more coming. "That sounds like good news." "It is good news. Medically speaking, you're ahead of schedule." Lisa turned away from the screen to face him directly. "But I've been thinking about something you said a few weeks ago, about how I study you differently than my other patients." David felt his pulse quicken. Their relationship had been building toward this moment for weeks, though neither of them had named what was happening between them. "I've been doing some studying of my own," Lisa continued, "trying to understand why this case feels so different to me, why I find myself thinking about your progress when I'm not at work, why I've been designing exercises specifically for you that I've never tried with anyone else." She stood up and walked to the window, her back to him as she gathered her thoughts. David watched her reflection in the glass, noting the tension in her shoulders that mirrored his own. "What I've realized," Lisa said slowly, "is that somewhere along the way, this stopped being just about your shoulder. It became about understanding you as a complete person, your habits, your fears, your potential, all of it." David's throat felt dry. "And professionally, how do you feel about that?" Lisa turned back to him, her expression more vulnerable than he'd ever seen it. "Honestly, it terrifies me. I've never invested this much of myself in a patient's recovery. I've never cared this much about the outcome." "But you do care," David said quietly. "It wasn't a question." "I care more than I should," Lisa admitted. "I care about whether you sleep well at night. I care about whether you're eating properly to support your recovery. I care about whether you're happy with your progress, not just whether you're meeting clinical milestones." David felt something shift inside him, a wall he'd been holding up for months finally beginning to crumble. "Lisa, I need to tell you something." She waited, her attention focused on him with the same intensity she brought to everything else. "This recovery process, working with you, It's changed more than just my shoulder. It's changed how I think about everything, my work, my relationships, my whole approach to life. David paused, struggling to find the right words. You've been studying me, yes, but you've also been teaching me to study myself, to pay attention to things I've been ignoring for years. Lisa's eyes softened. Like what? Like how I've been so focused on being strong that I forgot how to be flexible. How I've been so determined to be independent that I never learned how to accept help gracefully. David stood up, moving closer to where she stood by the window. How I've been so afraid of being vulnerable that I've never let anyone really see me. And now, Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Now I think I understand why you've been so thorough in your approach. You weren't just treating an injury. You were trying to understand the person behind the injury. And I think I've been wanting to be understood in a way I've never admitted to myself. Lisa looked at him for a long moment, and David could see her professional composure warring with something more personal. David, I need you to know that what I'm about to say goes against everything I've been taught about maintaining professional boundaries. What is it? I don't think I can continue as your therapist much longer. Not because you don't need continued care, but because my feelings about your recovery have become too personal. I find myself celebrating your progress like it's my own victory, worrying about setbacks like they're my own failures. David felt a mixture of disappointment and relief. What are you saying? I'm saying that my mission to help you heal completely has become the most important professional goal I've ever had. And that level of investment isn't fair to you or to my other patients. Lisa took a deep breath. I'm saying that I think I'm falling for you, and I don't know how to separate that from my desire to see you recover fully. The honesty in her admission took David's breath away. For months, he'd been wondering if the connection he felt was one-sided, if his growing feelings for Lisa were just the result of her professional care and attention. Can I tell you something? David said. I've been looking forward to our sessions, not because of the physical therapy, but because of the chance to spend time with you, because of the way you see me, really see me, in a way no one else ever has. Lisa's eyes filled with tears she was trying not to shed. This is so complicated. It doesn't have to be, David said gently. My shoulder is almost completely healed. In a few weeks, I won't need regular therapy anymore. What happens after that doesn't have to be complicated. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that your mission to understand me completely has been the most successful therapy I've ever experienced. Not just physically, but emotionally. You've taught me to pay attention to what my body needs, what my mind needs, what my heart needs. David moved closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. I'm suggesting that maybe, when our professional relationship ends, we could explore what kind of personal relationship might be possible. Lisa searched his face, looking for something she seemed to find there. Are you sure? Because once we cross that line, there's no going back to patient and therapist. I'm sure. David said without hesitation. You've been studying me like I'm a mission you're determined to complete successfully. What you might not realize is that you've already won. You've helped me understand myself better than I ever thought possible. Lisa smiled through her tears. So what happens now? Now we finish your mission properly. We complete my recovery. We transition our professional relationship appropriately. And then we see where this goes when we're just David and Lisa, not patient and therapist. And you're comfortable with that timeline? David nodded. I've learned patience from you. I've learned that the best results come from taking the time to do things right, not rushing toward a finish line. Lisa laughed softly. You have been paying attention. I've been paying attention to everything about you, David admitted. The way you bite your lip when you're concentrating. How you unconsciously mirror my movements during exercises. The way your face lights up when I have a breakthrough. So you've been studying me too, Lisa said, her professional mask finally slipping away completely. I've been studying you the way you've been studying me, David confirmed. Like you're important. Like understanding you matters. Like you're worth the time and attention it takes to really see someone. As they stood there in the quiet of her office, David realized that Lisa's mission to heal him had succeeded beyond anything either of them had imagined. She hadn't just fixed his shoulder, she'd helped him rediscover parts of himself he lost along the way. And now, as they prepared to transition from their professional relationship to something more personal, David understood that the real victory wasn't in getting back to who he was before the accident. The real victory was in becoming someone capable of being truly seen and understood by another person, someone worthy of Lisa's careful, thorough, loving attention. 3 months after their conversation in Lisa's office, David found himself standing at the base of the same climbing route where his accident had happened. But this time, he wasn't alone. Lisa stood beside him, checking her own climbing gear, with the methodical precision he'd come to love about her approach to everything. "Are you sure about this?" Lisa asked, though her tone suggested she already knew his answer. "I've never been more sure of anything," David replied, and he meant it. The past few months had transformed him in ways he couldn't have imagined when he first walked into her clinic as an injured, stubborn patient. Their professional relationship had ended 6 weeks ago with a final session that felt more like a celebration than a medical appointment. David's shoulder had healed completely. His range of motion was better than it had been before the accident, and more importantly, his entire approach to physical challenges had been revolutionized by Lisa's teaching. What had begun as their personal relationship felt like a natural extension of everything they built together during his recovery. Lisa had studied him so thoroughly as a patient that transitioning to knowing him as a partner felt seamless, like they'd been building toward this connection all along. "Remember what we practiced," Lisa said as they began their ascent together. "Let your body lead, trust the process, and don't force what isn't ready to happen." David smiled at her words, recognizing the philosophy that had guided not just his physical recovery, but their entire relationship. Lisa had taught him that the best results came from patience, attention, and trust rather than force and control. As they climbed side by side, David marveled at how different this experience felt from his previous solo attempts, where he had once seen the rock face as an opponent to be conquered. He now saw it as a partner in an intricate dance. Lisa's influence had changed not just how he climbed, but how he approached every challenge in his life. "You're thinking too much," Lisa called out from her position a few feet away. "I can see it in your shoulders." David laughed, relaxing into the rhythm of the climb. Even now, months after their first session, Lisa continued to read his body language with uncanny accuracy. The difference was that her attention no longer felt clinical. It felt like love. "Better?" he asked, adjusting his posture. "Perfect," Lisa replied, and David felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the physical exertion of climbing. When they reached the top, David realized that this moment represented more than just overcoming his fear of the route that had injured him. It represented the completion of Lisa's mission to heal him completely, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally as well. "How do you feel?" Lisa asked as they sat together on the summit, looking out over the valley below. "Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," David said, and the truth of that statement surprised him. For years, he'd been driven by a restless need to prove himself, to climb higher, work harder, achieve more. But sitting here with Lisa, he felt a contentment he'd never experienced before. "You know what I realized up here," David continued. "Your mission to understand me completely worked better than either of us expected. You didn't just heal my shoulder, you helped me understand parts of myself I've been ignoring for years." Lisa smiled, leaning against his good shoulder. "And what did you discover?" "That I've been so focused on being strong that I've forgotten how to be happy. That I've been so determined to be independent that I'd never learned how to be part of a team." David turned to look at her. "That I've been so afraid of being vulnerable that I'd never experienced what it felt like to be truly known by another person. And now you know what that feels like." "Now I know what it feels like to be studied by someone who cares about the results," David said softly. "To be understood by someone who sees that understanding as important work, not just professional obligation." Lisa's eyes grew thoughtful. "You know, when I first started working with you, I thought my goal was to get you back to your previous level of function. But somewhere along the way, that mission changed." "Changed how?" It became about helping you become the best version of yourself, not just a healed version of who you were before. Lisa's voice was filled with the same dedication David had come to recognize in her professional work. It became about understanding you so completely that I could help you understand yourself. David felt a familiar flutter of amazement at Lisa's insight. Even now, in their personal relationship, she continued to see him with the same thorough attention that had first attracted him. To her careful approach to healing, "Can I tell you something?" David said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Always." David pulled out a small velvet box, and Lisa's breath caught. "I've been thinking about what you said months ago, about how bodies tell stories, about how your job was to read those stories and help people write better ones." Lisa's eyes filled with tears as she realized what was happening. "What I want to tell you," David continued, opening the box to reveal a ring he'd designed himself, "is that you didn't just help me write a better story. You helped me understand that the best stories are written by two people who know each other completely." The ring was beautiful in its simplicity, a design that reflected both his architectural background and her love of natural forms. But more than that, it represented the patience and attention to detail that had characterized their entire relationship. "David," Lisa whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "you studied me like I was a mission you were determined to complete." "Successfully," David said, echoing the words that had defined their journey together. "What you might not have realized is that you won completely. You helped me become someone capable of being truly seen, truly understood, truly loved." Lisa's tears were flowing freely now. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I'm asking you to continue the mission," David said with a smile. "I'm asking you to spend the rest of your life studying me, understanding me, helping me become the best version of myself. And I'm promising to do the same for you." Lisa looked at the ring, then at David's face, seeing there the same careful attention and genuine care that had first drawn her to invest so completely in his recovery. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I want to continue the mission." As David slipped the ring onto her finger, he realized that Lisa's victory was complete. She had succeeded in healing him so thoroughly that he was now capable of the kind of vulnerability and trust that real love required. But more than that, he understood that her mission had never really been about him alone. It had been about both of them learning to see and be seen, to understand and be understood, to love and be loved with the kind of complete attention that transforms ordinary relationships into something extraordinary. As they began their descent together, David knew that this was just the beginning of their real adventure. Lisa had taught him that the best results came from patience, dedication, and the willingness to study what mattered most. And he had never found anything more worth studying than the woman who had seen him completely and loved him anyway. Their mission together was just beginning, and David had never been more excited about the prospect of being understood, challenged, and loved by someone who approached relationships with the same thoroughness she brought to everything else in her life. Lisa had indeed won their original mission, but in winning, she had created something even more valuable, a partnership built on complete understanding and genuine care. And that, David thought as they climbed down together, was the kind of victory that lasted a lifetime.